Welcome back to the MbaguMedia Finance Podcast. Today, we're diving into a really interesting geopolitical event, the US seizing an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. President Trump announced this, and it immediately sparked a lot of discussion, with some analysts even calling it a smart move.
That's a provocative label, isn't it? It makes you wonder what strategic thinking is behind an action that clearly ramps up tensions. It's not just about a ship, it's about the tangible application of foreign policy and economic pressure. This seizure represents a concrete action, a demonstration of resolve that goes beyond just words or abstract sanctions.
Exactly. The smart move perspective suggests there are specific, calculated goals the US administration is pursuing. To understand this, we need to unpack the geopolitical and economic implications, looking at how the perceived benefits might outweigh the inherent risks of increased confrontation. It's a calculated gamble, and we need to explore the rationale behind that calculation.
Absolutely. So, let's start by looking at the core of why this might be considered smart: disrupting the Maduro regime's financial lifelines. The US has a comprehensive sanctions regime against Venezuela, designed to choke off funds supporting President Maduro's government, and oil is central to that.
That's right. Oil tankers, in this context, are critical conduits. They can either facilitate compliance with sanctions or, more often, serve as the very means by which sanctions are circumvented. They are the arteries through which revenue flows, even when the broader economy is struggling.
So, the seizure of a tanker is a direct intervention in these lifelines. It's a physical manifestation of the US effort to disrupt illicit financial flows and apply maximum pressure. It's not just preventing one shipment, it's impacting Maduro's access to funds directly.
And this probes the direct financial consequences for the regime, aiming to tighten the economic noose that sanctions are intended to create. The smart move angle likely emphasizes the effectiveness of this particular action in achieving that objective, making sanctions a tangible force, not just rules on paper.
It's the difference between understanding the theory of economic pressure and seeing its practical, immediate application. But, of course, any aggressive foreign policy move like this carries inherent risks, particularly regarding escalation dynamics and regional geopolitical ripples.
That's a crucial point. The seizure is bound to increase tensions between the US and the Maduro government, and Venezuela will likely respond. This could range from diplomatic protests to more assertive retaliatory measures, and the nature of these responses is critical to assessing if this was indeed a smart move.
And we can't forget the reaction of other regional players and international bodies. Latin America is a complex region, and US actions rarely go unnoticed. How will countries like Brazil, Colombia, or Mexico react? What about organizations like the OAS? And critically, how will Venezuela's allies, like Russia and China, respond?
The smart move interpretation has to grapple with the risk of unintended escalation and, more importantly, the US strategy for managing that risk. Is this a calculated risk where the US believes it can manage the reaction, or is there concern about destabilizing an already fragile region?
This frames the seizure not just as an isolated incident, but as a move on a broader geopolitical chessboard. We're moving from the direct financial impact to the wider strategic consequences that ripple through international relations and regional stability.
Let's try to deconstruct that smart move rationale further. What criteria are analysts likely using? At its core, it's probably about balancing deterrence and disruption. The US wants to deter Venezuela from circumventing sanctions and disrupt its ability to do so.
Exactly. And this brings up the question of targeted disruption versus broad-based coercion. Is the US aiming to precisely disable specific financial flows, or is it a more generalized approach to economic pressure? How does this seizure align with broader US objectives for Venezuela?
To evaluate this, we can look at similar US actions in other contexts. The smart move thesis likely posits that the benefits, disrupted oil revenue, enhanced deterrence outweigh the costs like escalation or diplomatic backlash.
It also signals a renewed US assertiveness, or perhaps just a tactical adjustment. We need to examine if this action influences future Venezuelan oil dealings or international shipping practices. Will others think twice before engaging with Venezuelan oil?
This section really dives into the strategic thinking, dissecting the logic and intended outcomes. We're moving from the immediate impact to what this signals for the future, both for Venezuela and for how economic statecraft might be employed elsewhere.
And ultimately, the true measure of whether this was a smart move will be revealed in its long-term implications. We need to consider the potential impact on global oil supply and pricing dynamics, even if Venezuela's production is already low.
That's a great point. How might this event influence the investment climate and operational security for oil companies still operating in Venezuela, or those considering future engagement? And what about the legal precedents or challenges that could arise from maritime seizures?
International maritime law is complex, and actions that push its boundaries can set new precedents or spark lengthy legal battles. The smart move argument will be tested by its long-term effectiveness in achieving policy goals.
Did it bring Venezuela closer to a democratic transition? Did it significantly cripple the Maduro regime's financial capacity sustainably? Or was it just a temporary disruption? We have to evaluate if this action contributes to a sustainable resolution or prolongs conflict.
Does this seizure, in the grand scheme, advance or hinder the prospect of a negotiated political settlement? Analyzing the broader implications for international maritime law and sanctions enforcement is part of this long-term assessment. It's about understanding that the true intelligence of a strategic decision is often only apparent in hindsight.
Now, let's shift gears slightly and talk about economic statecraft. This seizure fits into a broader pattern of U.S. foreign policy tools. When we talk about sanctions, they can seem abstract, but seizing an asset like an oil tanker makes it very real and immediate.
It's a physical manifestation of intent. Think about other economic pressure tools like asset freezes or trade embargoes. A seizure like this is a more direct, forceful intervention, akin to cutting off a supply line. It signals that the U.S. is willing to take concrete action.
The smart move perspective likely sees this as an effective way to signal resolve and raise the stakes. It makes the cost of non-compliance undeniably clear to the Maduro regime and anyone considering doing business with them.
And it's not just about punishing Venezuela, it's about shaping behavior. By making an example of this tanker, the U.S. sends a message to the global maritime industry: engaging with Venezuelan oil carries significant risks.
This could deter future shipments, further isolate the Maduro government, and make it harder for them to access revenue. The analyst calling it smart might see this as a calculated move to disrupt Venezuela's economic lifeline without escalating to more overt military action.
It's a way to apply pressure where it hurts most, the pocketbook, while maintaining a degree of plausible deniability or a lower level of direct confrontation than, say, a naval blockade. It's a delicate balance, though.
And that brings us to the conclusion. The seizure of the Venezuelan oil tanker is a potent symbol of economic statecraft in action, a physical manifestation of diplomatic pressure. The smart move label invites a deep dive into the calculations behind it.
From disrupting financial lifelines to broader geopolitical signaling, the move is designed to have tangible consequences. But the label smart isn't without its counterarguments, given the inherent risks of escalation and regional reverberations.
Whether this action truly advances democratic transition in Venezuela, or merely tightens the screws on a suffering population while risking broader instability, remains to be seen. The true intelligence of this move will be judged by its long-term efficacy.
It's a high-stakes gambit where the calculated benefits, disruption, deterrence, signaling resolve must outweigh the immediate costs and potential for unforeseen escalations. It highlights the evolving nature of foreign policy tools.
Now, let's move on to our summary table, which breaks down the key factors, strengths, and challenges associated with this event. First up, under sanctions enforcement, the strength is that the seizure represents a tangible and forceful application of U.S. sanctions, directly disrupting the Maduro regime's revenue streams.
And it signals a commitment to enforcing economic pressure beyond rhetoric, potentially increasing deterrence against future circumvention attempts. However, a key challenge here is that the effectiveness of sanctions can be limited if alternative revenue sources or bypass methods are found.
There's also the risk of retaliatory measures from Venezuela or its allies, which could complicate enforcement or lead to unintended economic consequences. Moving to geopolitical risk and escalation, a strength is that a smart move implies a calculated risk where strategic benefits are deemed to outweigh potential regional tensions.
The US may believe it can manage any escalation, or that the disruption is worth the diplomatic friction. But the challenge is that actions in volatile regions carry inherent risks of unintended escalation. Neighboring countries could be destabilized, and international bodies might condemn the move.
The potential for retaliation, even if not military, could disrupt regional stability or economic activity. Next, under signal of resolve and deterrence, a strength is that this action serves as a strong signal to the global maritime and energy industries that engaging with Venezuelan oil carries significant risks.
It aims to deter future transactions that benefit the Maduro regime, effectively isolating them further economically. The challenge, however, is that the message might be interpreted differently by various international actors, potentially leading to shifts in alliances or increased diplomatic maneuvering by Venezuela's supporters.
Overly aggressive signals could backfire, galvanizing opposition or leading to unforeseen countermeasures. Now, regarding the impact on Venezuela's economy, a strength is that by directly intercepting oil shipments, the US aims to cripple Venezuela's primary source of foreign exchange.
This intensifies the economic crisis for the Maduro government, potentially hastening its collapse or a policy shift. However, a significant challenge is that Venezuela's oil production is already severely depressed. While any disruption matters, the overall impact on global markets might be minimal.
And importantly, the humanitarian consequences for the Venezuelan population, already severe, could be exacerbated. Finally, let's look at long-term strategic goals. A strength here is that the seizure could be seen as a strategic move towards achieving broader U.S. foreign policy objectives, such as promoting democratic transition.
It demonstrates a willingness to employ direct, impactful measures to achieve these ends. The major challenge is that the long-term success depends on whether this action contributes to a sustainable resolution of Venezuela's crisis or merely prolongs conflict.
It may also set precedents for international maritime law and sanctions enforcement, with unforeseen future implications. This covers our entire summary, including the key factors, strengths and insights, and challenges and weaknesses. We've processed the introduction, all 5 sections, the conclusion, and the comprehensive summary.
It's clear that while the seizure of the oil tanker presents a complex picture with potential strategic advantages, it's also fraught with risks and uncertainties. The label smart move really depends on how these long-term implications unfold and whether the intended strategic goals are ultimately achieved without creating greater instability.
Indeed. It's a prime example of the intricate dance of economic statecraft and geopolitical maneuvering on the global stage. Thanks for joining us on MbaguMedia, Finance.
Thanks for having me. It's been a fascinating discussion.